If I had known my sister would steal my husband, I would have locked my door forever. But that day, I welcomed her inside with love. I'm telling you this now, my child, because some truths grow heavier when you carry them alone. For 38 years, I believed I had a good marriage. Not perfect but safe. Thomas was a respected man, quiet, polite, the kind of husband people praised in front of you and envied behind your back. And I was proud of that. Maybe too proud. My sister Lydia had always been different from me. Where I was calm, she was restless. Where I settled, she chased. When her marriage collapsed, she had nowhere to go. No savings, no left. So I opened my home. That decision didn't break my house. It poisoned it. Lydia arrived with 2 suitcases and tired eyes. She hugged me longer than usual, cried into my shoulder, and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I believed her. I always did. At first, everything felt normal. Lydia helped in the kitchen. She laughed with Thomas at dinner. Too much laughter, maybe, but I told myself I was imagining things. After all, she was family. And Thomas, he was just being kind. That's what wives tell themselves when something feels wrong, but not wrong enough to accuse. Soon, small changes crept in. Thomas started coming home later. Lydia began wearing makeup, even when she wasn't going anywhere. I noticed, but I said nothing. Silence is where betrayal learns to breathe. One evening, I walked into the living room and stopped short. Thomas and Lydia were sitting close on the couch. Not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt intentional. They jumped apart when they saw me. "Oh, we were just talking," Lydia said too quickly. Talking doesn't make a room feel heavy. But that room did. I began noticing things I had never noticed before. Lydia wearing perfume at night. Thomas smiling at his phone. My questions answered with gentleness that felt rehearsed. "You're tired," Thomas would say. "You worry too much," Lydia would add. And I believed them. They didn't need to lie much. I was already lying to myself. Weeks passed, then months. One night, as I folded laundry, I found a scarf, silk, soft, not mine. I held it to my face. It smelled warm, familiar, but not like me. When I asked Thomas, he barely looked up. Must be Lydia's. Later that same night, I saw Lydia wearing it. She froze when she noticed me, staring. Then she smiled. Something inside me cracked but quietly. That smile told me more than words ever could. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to scream. But instead, I did what many women do when their world begins to shake. I waited. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard Lydia's door creak open. Soft footsteps crossed the hallway. I held my breath. Then I heard whispering. Not from her room, but from downstairs. I stood in the dark, heart pounding, realizing my husband wasn't beside me. And my sister wasn't in her bed. The night I heard their voices together, I learned something terrifying. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't move. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it downstairs. Thomas wasn't in our bed. Lydia wasn't in her room. And suddenly, My home felt unfamiliar, like I was trespassing in my own life. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There always is, when you're desperate enough to believe one. I walked back to my bedroom quietly and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. Minutes passed. Demori. Finally, Thomas returned, alone. You okay? He asked casually, slipping under the covers like nothing had happened. Yes, I lied. That was the first lie, but not the last. The next morning, Lydia avoided my eyes. She spoke softly, carefully, like someone choosing words instead of telling the truth. Thomas kissed my forehead before leaving for work, something he hadn't done in months. That kiss confused me more than comforted me. Throughout the day, my mind replayed the whispers, the timing, the silence. I wanted to ask Lydia directly, sister to sister, woman to woman. So that afternoon, I did. Did you come downstairs last night? I asked, pretending to fold towels. Lydia looked up slowly. Though slowly. No, she said. Why would I? The answer came easily. Too easily. A lie told without effort is always practiced. I nodded and said nothing. But inside, something hardened. That was the moment trust didn't just crack, it bent. Dangerously close to breaking. From that day on, the house changed. Thomas grew distant, but attentive when Lydia was around. He laughed more, stayed longer in the living room. When I entered, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Smiles faded. Lydia started acting fragile, crying over small things, talking about how lonely she felt, how broken her marriage had left her. She needs us, Thomas said one evening. Was not me. That word us cut deeper than any insult. Soon, Lydia began planting doubts. Someone's poisoned kindness wrapped in concern. You've seemed stressed lately, she'd say gently. Maybe you're imagining things. Thomas works so hard. You should trust him. And when I tried to speak, Thomas would sigh. Why are you being suspicious? He asked. Lydia's been through enough. Enough. I started questioning my own thoughts, my memory, my instincts. I apologized for asking questions that had answers waiting to be told. Gaslighting doesn't start with cruelty, it starts with care. One evening, Thomas came home late again. When I asked where he'd been, he rubbed his forehead like a tired man carrying the weight of my doubt. Work, he said. Lydia nodded in agreement from across the room. Tupe apli. One story. That night, while Thomas showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once, then again. I didn't mean to look, but the screen lit up. A name appeared. Lydia. A contact saved as ill. Liars think letters protect them. I felt sick. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. My hands shook as I placed the phone back exactly where it was. When Thomas returned, he picked it up immediately and turned the screen away from me. That movement said everything. Later, lying in bed beside him, I realized something painful. They weren't afraid of me discovering the truth. They were confident I wouldn't. The next morning, I decided to do the one thing they never expected me to do: stay silent and start watching. When a woman stops asking questions, it's not because she believes you. It's because she's preparing to survive the truth. I didn't accuse them anymore. That was my mistake, or maybe my strength. From the outside, I became quieter, calmer, almost distant. Inside, my mind was sharp, awake, and listening to everything. They mistook my silence for surrender. Thomas started moving freely again, laughing louder, locking his phone less, carefully because he thought I had given up. Lydia relaxed too. She hummed while cooking. She slept better at night. Guilt only stays heavy when it's watched. I began noticing patterns. Thomas left for work earlier on Wednesdays. Lydia always had errands those mornings. When Thomas said he was tired, Lydia defended him before I could speak. When Lydia cried, Thomas appeared instantly, like he was waiting for the sound. One afternoon, Lydia asked me to pick up groceries. She handed me her phone to check the list. That phone felt warm in my hand. Not from use, but from secrets. Some objects carry more truth than people. As I scrolled, the screen glitched just for a second. A notification slid down. "I miss you already, L." My heart stopped. I didn't react. I didn't breathe. Lydia was watching me carefully, pretending not to watch me at all. I handed the phone back and smiled. "Anything else?" I asked. She shook her head. That smile nearly broke me. That night, after everyone slept, I sat alone in the dark living room. I told myself I needed proof. Not suspicion. Not feelings. Proof. Because without proof, I would be the crazy one. In betrayal, the victim is always guilty until evidence speaks. Days later, the opportunity came. Unexpectedly, Thomas left his phone charging on the kitchen counter and rushed upstairs to shower. Lydia was out and was quiet. Yet, I stood there staring at the phone like it might explode. Then I picked it up. My fingers trembled as I unlocked it. His birthday. The same password he'd used for years. That alone hurt more than I expected. I went straight to the messages. There were hundreds. Messages I was never meant to read. I hate lying to her. I wish things were different. She doesn't notice anymore. Soon, just be patient. 3 years. 3 years of stolen moments, shared jokes, whispered plans inside my home. They didn't just betray me. They built a second life on my silence. My chest felt tight, vision blurred. Then I saw the message that made my hands go numb. "When she's gone, we won't have to hide." Gone, not divorced. Separated. Gone. Footsteps sounded upstairs. I locked the phone quickly and placed it back exactly where it had been. My body moved before my mind caught up. I sat at the table, staring at nothing. Thomas came down moments later. "You okay?" asked. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. And I realized something terrifying. I didn't recognize my own husband anymore. The man you love can become a stranger without ever leaving the room. That night, Lydia came home late. She avoided my eyes. Thomas barely spoke to me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying those words. When she's gone. They weren't just cheating. They were waiting. And that was the moment I decided I wouldn't confront them. I would let them expose themselves. The moment I stopped begging for love. I became dangerous. I didn't cry after that night. That surprised me most. I woke up the next morning calm. for a woman whose marriage had already ended. Without her consent, I made breakfast. I smiled. I asked Lydia how she slept. I kissed Thomas goodbye. They watched me carefully, like people watching a storm that never arrives. When a woman goes quiet after betrayal, it's not peace, it's preparation. I began doing something I hadn't done in years. I observed. Thomas started trusting my silence. He talked freely again. Lydia relaxed, careless in small ways. They believed I was broken, distracted, weak. That belief became my shield. I began collecting moments, not evidence yet, just behavior. The way Thomas checked the clock when Lydia left the room. The way Lydia mirrored his moods. The way they never argued. Affairs are strange like that. They feel perfect because they aren't real. One afternoon, I suggested something casually. "Lydia, why don't you stay longer?" I said over tea. "You don't need to rush into finding your own place." Her eyes lit up just for a second. Then she hid it. Thomas looked up sharply. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "She's family." They didn't realize I was tightening the trap. From that day on, I became generous. So generous, I encouraged Lydia to redecorate her room. I told Thomas to take time for himself. I stopped asking where he was going. I stopped waiting up for him at night. Freedom makes liars careless. They began meeting more openly. Less fear, more confidence. Sometimes Lydia wouldn't even pretend to leave the house, she'd just nap. While Thomas worked from home, I saw it all, and I wrote it all down. Dates, times, expressions, words. Because truth is powerful, but memory alone is fragile. I wasn't spying anymore. I was documenting. One evening, Thomas came home irritated. "She's been emotional lately," he said, rubbing his temples. I looked up slowly. "She?" I asked. He froze. "Work," he corrected quickly. Now that slip told me something important. They were starting to feel pressure. Soon after, Lydia tried a different tactic. She sat beside me one afternoon, tears in her eyes. "I feel like I don't belong here," she whispered. "Maybe I'm a burden to you." That performance was flawless. I took her hand. "Oh no," I said gently. "You're safe here." Her shoulders relaxed. She thought she'd won. That was her biggest mistake. Behind the scenes, I started preparing my exit, not emotionally, but strategically. I checked these wives, the look at Chantel. It's too late. I realized how carefully Thomas had arranged our finances. For us, for himself. That night, I overheard them again, this time louder, careless. "Soon," Lydia whispered. "I can't keep pretending," Thomas replied. Pretending. I was the only one pretending now. They thought the ending was theirs to write. I planned my move carefully. Shouting. No scenes. No private confrontations. Because I wanted witnesses. The following Sunday, I invited everyone. Children, in-laws, neighbors, friends. A family dinner. Thomas looked uneasy. Lydia looked nervous. I smiled. As I set the table, I realized this would be the last meal I ever served as their fool. and the first where truth would eat. First, there is a special kind of fear people feel when they realize the truth is about to be spoken, and they can't stop it. By Sunday afternoon, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter, heavier. The table was set perfectly. Candles lit, plates arranged with care. Lydia kept fixing her hair. Thomas checked his phone every few minutes. Neither of them asked why I'd invited so many people. They didn't dare. When liars feel watched, they mistake silence for mercy. The guests arrived one by one, smiles, laughter, familiar voices. Family filled the room. Stories overlapped. Glasses clinked. On the surface, it looked like a celebration. But under the table, my hands were clenched, so tightly my fingers ached. Dinner began. I served calmly, moving between chairs like a woman who had done this 1,000 times. Thomas avoided my eyes. Lydia laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Halfway through the meal, I stood up. Once said softly. The room quieted instantly. Truth doesn't need volume, it needs timing. Thomas looked up sharply. Lydia's fork paused midair. I've been thinking a lot about family, I continued. About loyalty. About trust. A few people nodded politely. I used to believe that if you loved hard enough, nothing could break a marriage. Thomas shifted in his seat. Lydia swallowed. I looked directly at her. But I was wrong. The air thickened. Someone laughed nervously. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This, I said, unfolding it slowly, is a list. Thomas went pale. Fear changes a man faster than guilt ever will. Dates, I continued. Timis. Moments when my husband was not where he said he was. A few gasps escaped the table. Thomas stood up abruptly. Evelyn, this isn't the time. Oh, it is, I said calmly. Lydia shook her head. You're confused, she whispered. You're tired. I smiled at her. I was tired, I said. Not blind. Then I read the message. Autilawi. When she's gone, we won't have to hide. Silence crashed over the room. Someone dropped a fork. Thomas's mouth opened but no words came out. Lydia burst into tears. She's lying. She cried. She's imagining things. I turned to Thomas. Tell them, I said gently. Tell them I imagined it. The truth waits patiently for liars to run out of excuses. Thomas didn't speak. His silence said everything. The room erupted questions, anger, disbelief. Lydia sobbed harder, collapsing into a chair. Thomas stared at the table like it might swallow him whole. I raised my hand. I'm not finished. The room quieted again. I stayed silent because I wanted proof, I said. And because I wanted witnesses. I looked around the table. Tonight, you are all my witnesses. Thomas finally spoke, his voice shaking. Evelyn, we can talk about this privately. I shook my head. No, I said. You already chose privacy for 3 years. Some conversations only belong in the light. I turned to Lydia. You came into my home as my sister, I said. And you leave it as a stranger. Her crying stopped. She looked at me with something new. Hatred. I picked up my glass, hands steady. "This is my last dinner as your wife," I said to Thomas. "And the last favor I will ever give either of you." I set the glass down, and then I walked away from the table. Behind me, I heard Thomas call my name, but for the first time in decades. I didn't turn around. People think betrayal ends when the truth comes out. But that's only when the consequences begin. I didn't sleep in that house again. That night, I packed one suitcase, just essentials. No drama, no shouting. I left before dawn, while Thomas sat at the kitchen table staring at a cup of cold coffee he hadn't touched. He didn't stop me. That silence was louder than any apology. A man who begs after exposure isn't sorry he's scared. By morning, the family knew everything. Phones rang. Messages flooded in. Some people asked questions. Others didn't need answers. Lydia didn't leave immediately. She stayed in my house now thinking she had won. But victory built on betrayal collapses fast. Within days, whispers turned into distance. Invitations stopped. Friends avoided her calls. Family members chose sides, and blood didn't protect her the way she expected. Thomas tried to reach me. Once, then twice, then every day. "I made a mistake," he said in one voicemail. "You're my wife. My wife." Men remember vows only after they break them. I stayed somewhere small, quiet, a place with sunlight in the mornings and no memories on the walls. For the first time in years, I could breathe without waiting for footsteps. The lawyer was calm, efficient, unemotional. He told me the truth Thomas never had about accounts, assets, and intentions. About plans made quietly while I trusted loudly. Thomas had prepared for a life without me, just not for one where the truth followed him. Betrayers plan exits but never consequences. The divorce moved quickly. That told me everything I needed to know. Thomas lost more than his marriage. He lost respect. At work, people looked at him differently. Friends stopped inviting him over. The charming man with the perfect life suddenly became a warning story. Lydia moved out soon after. No savings. No pardon. Serious. She tried calling me once. I didn't answer. Some doors closed quietly. That's mercy. Not every ending needs a conversation. Weeks passed, then months. I rebuilt slowly. New routines, new mornings. I learned the sound of my own thoughts again. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never heal me. One afternoon, I ran into someone who knew Thomas. "He's not doing well," they said carefully. "He asks about you." I nodded politely. I didn't ask questions, because I already knew. Regret always arrives late and alone. Years passed, softened. And then, one evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there he was. Older, smaller, nervous. "Thomas, I just wanted to talk," he said. "I owe you that." I looked at him for a long moment. Behind him was everything he had chosen. Behind me was everything I had rebuilt. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I missed him, but because I wanted him to hear the truth he had never prepared for. Forgiveness is not given when someone asks for it. It's given when you're finally free enough to refuse it. I didn't offer Thomas a seat right away. I watched him stand there, unsure, uncomfortable feelings I had carried for years while he slept peacefully beside me. Time had changed him. His hair was thinner. His shoulders slouched forward, like regret had weight. "I won't stay long," he said. "That would be best," I replied. The strongest boundaries are spoken calmly. Sat anyway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Silence has a way of exposing people who depend on noise to hide. Thomas cleared his throat. "I think about you every day," he said. "I made a terrible mistake. A mistake. A choice. Not a betrayal. A mistake." I folded my hands in my lap. "You made thousands of mistakes," I said quietly. "Every day. For 3 years." He flinched. "I never meant to hurt you." "That's the problem," I replied. "You never meant anything at all. Intent doesn't erase impact." He looked down at the floor. "Lydia and I." "It's over," he said. "She ruined everything." I raised my eyes slowly. "No," I said. "You did." That truth landed hard. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he had no defense ready. "I lost everything," he whispered. "Family, my respect, home, nada." "Yes," I said. "That's what consequences sound like. Regret speaks in self-pity, not accountability." He looked up, eyes wet. "I just want you to forgive me." There it was. Love, not remorse. Relief. Forgiveness as an escape. I stood and walked to the window, watching the sunlight fade into evening. "Do you know why I survived this?" I asked. He shook his head. "Because I stopped waiting for you to change," I continued, "and started choosing myself." I turned back to him. "Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation," I said. "And it doesn't mean access." His face tightened. "I still love you," he said desperately. I smiled sadly. "No," I said. "You miss the woman who made your life comfortable. Love doesn't betray, it protects." He sat there for a long moment, defeated. "I don't know how to live with what I've done," he whispered. "That's not my responsibility anymore," I replied. I walked to the door and opened it. "This is where our story ends," I said calmly. Not in anger but in clarity. He stood slowly. At the door, he turned back one last time. "If you could go back," he asked, "would you do anything differently?" I looked at him, then smiled a real one. "Yes," I said. "I would have left sooner." He nodded, eyes full, and then he walked out. As I closed the door, I realized the hardest part wasn't forgiving him. It was forgiving myself. The hardest betrayals teach the clearest lessons, if you survive them. After Thomas left that evening, I sat alone in my quiet house. The walls were no longer heavy with whispers or secrets. The air felt lighter, as if every lie had finally been exhaled. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just breathed, slowly, deeply. For years, I had carried guilt that wasn't mine. For years, I had blamed myself for trusting, for loving, for opening my home. And yet, in the silence that followed, I understood something vital. The betrayal was theirs, not mine. Freedom begins when you stop carrying other people's sins. I thought about Lydia, my sister, the woman who had once been my closest ally. Her envy and her greed had driven her to destroy what I valued most. But she too had lost. Not just my trust, but respect, dignity, and the chance to heal. People who build their lives on someone else's misery rarely find happiness. Thomas, the man I had loved and trusted, the man I thought would protect me above all else. He had lost far more than I did. He had lost my respect, my faith, and the years he could never get back. The empty house he returned to was a mirror of the choices he made, and no apology could fill it. Some lessons don't need words, they need consequences. I took a long walk that evening. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold and crimson. I realized that for decades, I had given love and patience, freely sometimes foolishly. Yes, but always with heart. And now, I could finally give that care to myself. That is the truth I want to share. Betrayal doesn't destroy you. Silence doesn't protect you. What destroys a life is staying in a place where lies are louder than love. The moment you reclaim your life, the moment you choose yourself, is the moment true healing begins. Survival isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your peace. I returned home, set the kettle on, and sat by the window. My granddaughter's laughter drifted from the yard. Life, with all its beauty and pain, continued. I realized I had lived through heartbreak, humiliation, and deceit, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and whole. I looked at my reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, I smiled without hiding anything. That reflection wasn't just me, it was the story of every woman who had been betrayed, every person who had been silenced, every heart that had been broken and learned to beat again. You can survive the impossible and come out unbroken. So, my child, remember this: when life tests you with lies and deceit, trust wisely. Love fiercely, but never for worth. Betrayal is not the end. Silence is not victory. And pain, if faced with courage, can become your greatest teacher. I lost a husband, a sister, and years of trust. But I found myself. And that is a story worth telling.